Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, welcome to this week's first edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight, the fight against corruption gets a boost. This after President Cyril Ramaphosa's office today announced the appointment of a 9-person panel to advise him on fighting corruption and on how to proceed on the state capture report.
The court is of the view that it will be in the interest of justice that the 4 accused or applicants be admitted to bail. The application is therefore granted and bail is set in the amount of 50,000 rand for each of you.
On the same day, former Transnet head honchos appeared on the dock on a range of charges. That coming up, of course, in a couple of days after President Ramaphosa signed a proclamation authorizing the SIU to probe corruption and maladministration allegations at the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, whose CEO is also among my guests for this evening. The Watchdog starts now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has appointed a National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. His office says will strengthen the country's fight against corruption and fraud. The council comprises of representatives from advocacy organizations and other civil society groups, as well as business leaders and academics. The council will be chaired by Professor Firoz Kachalia, with Inkosikazi Nomandla Dorothy Mhlauli as his deputy. Corruption Watch luminaries Kavisha Pillay and David Lewis will also form part of it. And so will unionist Nkosana Dolopi, activist and researcher Barbara Schreiner, lawyer Nokzola Gloria Kumalo, journalist and academic Thandeka Mbeki, as well as activist Sikwetlane Pamodi. Vincent.
The Council will also provide advisory input on matters related to government's comprehensive response to the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. An interdepartmental team led by the Presidency is currently developing government's response, which President Ramaphosa will present to Parliament by the 22nd of October 2022. The Council will advise the President on matters relating to fighting corruption in line with the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, as well as on the effective implementation of the strategy by government and civil society, including the private sector.
Well, staying with corruption matters, South Africans today woke up. When we all woke up, we were greeted with the news of the arrest of former Transnet CEO Brian Molefe, former COO Anoj Singh, as well as regiment's capital directors Niven Pillay and Lita Nyonya. The 4 appeared in the Palm Ridge Specialized Crimes Court in Johannesburg and were later granted 50,000 rand bail each. The arrest comes on the back of the recommendations of the State Capture Commission report.
The report recommended further investigation into Molefe, Singh and the other former Transnet Chief Executive Officer Siyabonga Gama for possible prosecution on charges of fraud, corruption and the contravention of the Public Finances Management Act. It identifies the trio as the primary architects and implementers of state capture at the SOE. It said evidence established convincingly that state capture occurred at Transnet in the period between 2009 and 2018. Molefe was appointed Group Executive Officer of Transnet on the recommendation of the former Public Enterprises Minister Malusi Gigaba, despite him not being the highest scoring candidate. According to the State Capture report, Molefe's appointment was predicted by the Gupta-owned newspaper The New Age before it happened. The Commission found that many of the contracts that favored the Guptas after 2011 arose in the context of the market demand strategy developed by Molefe as Group CEO and Group CFO Singh. Singh was CFO of Transnet from 2009 until moving to Eskom in 2015. The market demand strategy was a counter-cyclical investment strategy involving investment of 300 billion rand in various sections of Transnet ahead of demand on the premise that demand would peak within 3 years. The biggest portion of the proposed investment spent was allocated to an accelerated procurement of locomotives. The report says the procurement of 95 electric locomotives from CSR, a Chinese locomotive manufacturer, was the first significant locomotive transaction tainted by corruption. Political analyst Andile Nongogo says it's encouraging to see someone can be prosecuted for contravention of the PFMA.
I like the fact that there is a charge that relates to violating the PFMA, the Public Finance Management Act, because there has been a widespread belief that you can't go to jail for violating the Public Finance Management Act, and those prosecutions are history-making where people are prosecuted there. And also the issue of fraud and money laundering being a charge where the public can start to understand that compliance with FICA and the money laundering laws is a very serious offense.
Molefe and Singh have been released on 50,000 rand bail each. Claudia Sefako Mosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Mpumelelo Zikalala is a legal practitioner from Zikalala Attorneys and joins us now on the line to make sense of some of the things that came out of the arrest of these four gentlemen earlier today. Mpumelelo, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. From what we are told, the trio, that is Anoj and Brian, and are the primary architects and implementers of state capture. Of course, that list includes Gama, who of course was not a part of today's proceedings.
Good evening to you and also to the viewers. The reason why they would call them the primary architects, let's remember their role in terms of Transnet. They have a fiduciary duty. The Companies Act places a whole lot of weight on them to say, we are giving you the trust of maintaining these particular entities and making sure that all the decisions which are going to take are for the best interest of the entity. Added to that, we are going to add the PFMA, in which I think if it's section 51, if I'm not mistaken, will then place significant duties upon you. And if you delegate those particular duties in terms of section 56 or even 57, then you must make sure that at the end of the day they're able to deliver. So in any instances in which you fail to observe those things or anything goes wrong, we come back to you as the accounting authorities in line with Chapter 10 of also the PFMA when it comes to criminal proceedings. So the law is simply playing its course in this particular instance, in which the NPA, I think, would have reason to believe that you do have a case to answer. Come and explain yourself in terms of these particular transactions, were they bona fide transactions or were they transactions which were manufactured for the sole cause of defrauding the South African government and South African taxpayers?
Of course, as Andile Nongogo was saying, in that package for a while, I guess because, there haven't really been people who have been prosecuted for violating the Public Finance Management Act, which then led to the belief among many people that you simply can't be prosecuted for that.
Definitely, and I think it was a lack of oversight and a lack of, let's say, from the side of law enforcement agencies, because at the end of the day, as the ultimate accountable body or the ultimate accountable person, which is the president in this case, if a certain department does not receive a clean audit, they should sound alarm bells in terms of saying, why aren't we performing this in any of these instances? If you get a report from the AG saying that certain things are not being done in accordance with the law, why aren't you moving and charging all the individuals that are involved? In a perfect world, and in a world that you should all strive to, we should have a report from the AG which comes in, and then immediately after that it is transferred to law enforcement agencies, and there are people who are prosecuted in line with the PFMA when it comes to municipalities with the Municipal Finance Management Act, with the sole intention of saying that if there's been non-compliance, we want to hold you accountable, we want to recover all the funds that are there, because we want to protect the public purse, in which it is these dedicated South Africans that wake up every morning to go and work so that at the end of the day they're able to contribute to the well-being of the country. If those monies are squandered, if those monies are mishandled, and they're being directed to entities which are not going to do the job, or entities which have been awarded a government tenders in an improper manner, there must be some accountability that comes in. And the only time in which corruption would ever stop is when we start taking these matters seriously And I think maybe the NPA or even our government is starting to look into that direction. This is the start, and we're hoping for more to come.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I mean, fraud and corruption are not as easy, I mean, to prosecute, I mean, because often, I mean, they involve very sophisticated transactions. You have accountants involved, but also lawyers.
But I think in this case, we do have such legislation that can be used. One which comes to mind is POCA, the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, which then says or cuts the nest wide in terms of saying, whenever you are involved in a certain transaction, especially when you have monies in your account that you can't account for, it does make provision of saying that you are directly or indirectly or known of or to have known of those particular transactions taking place, thus replacing or reversing the burden in terms of proof to you as a person who has received the money, in terms of saying, if you have an X amount in your account, where did you get that money from? How did you make that amount of money? If it's a donation, what is the source of the intention of this particular donation? Please explain to us. If you fail to do that, then POCA is certainly going to come in and make sure that you are punished for those type of matters. But what matters the most, you can have the most perfect legislation ever. It is the warm bodies behind these particular pieces of legislation which have to investigate the matter and make sure that they are ready for trial and make sure that they are winnable at court. Now, what springs to mind is the quality and the quantity of the evidence that we need. If you wait for too long, that particular evidence is going to diminish. Individuals which will be key witnesses are going to pass on, and then you won't have them as witnesses, and thus making your case very weak. As you go to criminal proceedings, the burden of proof is that you must be found guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Now, if you don't provide adequate evidence, at the end of the day, you're not going to suffice or pass that particular barrier or burden of proof as a state, now leading to individuals that ought to have been arrested and prosecuted and probably money is recovered. Will not be able to do that if we do not act fast enough.
You are right. I mean, but also on the other hand, we've also seen how many of these cases have been brought, you know, to a court pretty quickly without much investigation having gone into them and resulting in people making all sorts of accusations. Hence, even today, you had a lot of people saying, well, we'll only see, watch and see whether indeed this case or the charges that have been leveled against these individuals will in fact stick.
In fact, many others have termed that you arrest in order to investigate, in terms of arresting after you have investigated. Now, causing a whole lot of delays. Now, it's in a system such as South Africa, you shouldn't wait for the whole year in order for your trial to go to court and be allocated a trial date, and in order for the first witness to go into the witness box. It is simply not on. And it certainly goes against the rights which are entrenched in our constitution of saying that the trial must start, proceed, and end within the shortest amount of time available. Also in line with that, the criminal procedure then says, I think it's section 345 capital A, that deals with unreasonable delay. It again points the questions to our law enforcement agencies. We must begin to ask ourselves, do we have a law enforcement agencies, entities, which are able to do the work within the fastest amount of time, that are able to recover those particular amounts that have been squandered or maybe they've been taken away from the public purse? If the answer is no, let's focus on that so that at the end of the day, we have meaningful arrests. That's what we need at the end of the day. It's all well and good to say that Mr. So-and-so and Mrs. So-and-so are corrupt, but what would be more important and more meaningful is to say, we have recovered an X amount of money. It has been brought back to the public purse. We're able to focus on healthcare. We're able to focus on education with the money that was meant to do all those particular public functionaries anyways. Now, if you focus on arresting alone, then you are not going to win at the end of the day. It's going to be a system of saying, yes, they are arrested, but what next? Moving faster, making sure that you're able to arrest as soon as possible, you're able to prosecute as soon as possible, is certainly going to help and bring back the reliance and also the trust that the South African public should have in our legal system.
In fact, I mean, only last week, there was a report that came out, which was quite an indictment on the NPA, both the NPA and the Hawks, which then said, there were zero, prosecutions, thousands of pages of the state capture report, so many tens of witnesses who have been referred for prosecutions, yet in spite of all of that, in spite of a new leadership at both institutions, the Hawks and the NPA, we were still nowhere, which the report then said was one of the reasons people had lost confidence in many of these state law enforcement agencies.
And one must look at the skills of the individuals that are there. I have no doubt that they may have the dedication in which they need, but if you lack the skills and the financial resources that go hand in hand with making sure that you have successful prosecutions, then you're going to have a problem. Another point in which, or maybe another element that we've been missing in South Africa, is the development of our criminal justice system, the structure, which is the courts, to make sure that they're able to work optimally and be able to serve us as members of the public as quickly as possible. Now, if we are going to have courts which only work a certain number of hours in a day, for example, they don't even open on weekends. Now, the question would be, how fast or how quickly can you be able to solve these particular matters if you are only confined to maybe from 9 up until 3 o'clock in terms of the hardcore work when it comes to our criminal justice systems? From Monday to Friday, weekends were not open. And then how are we going to be able to function and make sure that we're able to make sure that we deal with this backlog of law enforcement agency work? We deal with the backlog of making sure that the cases are cleared as soon as possible. We deal with the backlog of making sure that all the evidence that comes in and are led by the various witnesses is dealt with as soon as possible. If we do not dedicate ourselves in terms of making sure that we have that, I do not think that we are going to succeed. Let's remember the ultimate goal. All that we are looking for, the South African public is looking for, is that we have laws that work and that are respected. We have law enforcement agencies which are able to do their job. And at the end of the day, we're able to recover the funds which are supposed to go to members of the public that end up in private coffers.
Well, if the Chief Justice's words some months ago, if I'm not mistaken, are anything to go by, where he was basically saying, look, I'm open to conversations about how we can deal with this situation, because at the end of the day, it's going to have implications for how, he runs his courts. So if everyone is prepared, willing and able to come to the party, these conversations can actually be started, because it's going to mean something in terms of remuneration, working hours, and a whole host of things. If, for example, they were to, step up a bit.
But with all due respect, the Chief Justice has presided over the function of courts for a number of years. Since he was Deputy Chief Justice at the time, probably he had a role in terms of making sure that they are able to work optimally. There's a role in which you should focus on in terms of saying, what are the opening hours and the functioning of the courts? Are they really opening and working at that particular point in time? Or are there certain hours which are being wasted? Let's hold the stakeholders' relations, which should have been called a long time ago. Let's sit and discuss with the legal practitioners, the legal practitioner bodies that are there, for example, the Black Law Association. Let's also talk with the magistrates and even with the judges and say, what is a combined solution that you can all put together and make sure that we're able to curtail these particular instances or delays which are there. If you don't call for such meetings, you're not going to be able to achieve what we need at the end of the day, regardless of the fact that from the NPA side, they also have their own problems in terms of investigations. From the SAPS or the law enforcement agencies, they also have their own issues. But they've never been, I may be mistaken because maybe I've missed it, but there's never been a national working, let's say, indaba, dealing with how do we make sure that law enforcement agencies are working optimally? How do we make sure that our courts are working optimally? How do we make sure that there are no blockages which are there? How can you use technology, for example, to ensure that you are able to work in a manner in which we'll be able to deliver these results? And also from the side of government, the level of accountability is, to me, at its lowest. You can't have a minister, deputy minister, a DG, persons who are going to sit within the audit committees, certain parliamentary committees who are going to miss these irregularities, these instances of non-compliances with the law. And at the end of the day, wait for law enforcement agencies to go and investigate and arrest. The question is, what are you doing in those meetings? What exactly are you looking for? What level of non-compliance are you looking for? And what recommendations are you doing? So if you come in year in and year out, every single financial year, with certain fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and yet no one has been arrested, what are you doing in those particular positions? I think we need to take a step back and say, in order for this function to work optimally, all of us would need to work together with one important thing of saying that let's just move with speed.
Well, thank you.
To save the little money so that we are happy.
Thank you very much for your time at that point where that line is not holding as well as it did right at the beginning. Let's leave it there. Mpumelelo Zikalala, legal practitioner from Zikalala Attorneys based in KwaZulu-Natal. Well, staying in that province, the Hawks have arrested 4 KwaZulu-Natal government officials, including a senior official in the Premier's office. The operation was conducted by the Hawks National Clean Audit Task Team of the Serious Commercial Crime Unit. National Hawks spokesperson Thandi Mbambo says the official in the Premier's office faces charges of defeating the ends of justice and intimidation. 2 of the 4 officials were arrested on charges of fraud, corruption and money laundering. The Hawks say more arrests are imminent.
The chairperson of Mhlathuze Water Board of KwaZulu-Natal reported allegations of irregular appointment of service providers, that is a legal panel, without following the supply chain management protocols, as well as contravention of the Section 51, subsection 1 of the PFMA Act by not complying with the operational policies of the public entity. Investigation also revealed that some senior officials are implicated in the irregularities which resulted in the Mhlathuze Water Board of KwaZulu-Natal being prejudiced by an amount of plus minus 37 million.
After the break, President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed a proclamation authorizing the SIU to probe corruption and maladministration at the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS. We sit down with the fund's CEO. Long overdue. Well, that's how one education union reacted to the announcement a few days ago. The SIU announced on Friday that President Cyril Ramaphosa had signed a proclamation authorizing it to probe corruption and maladministration at the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS. NSFAS, an entity within the Department of Higher Education, is tasked with administering tens of billions of rands a year in business and loans, bursaries I should say, and loans to post-matric students from poor backgrounds. SIU spokesperson Kaiser Khanyago joins us on the line for the first part of this conversation. Good evening, sir. Thanks very much for your time. What is it exactly that the SIU is going to be probing? What are the terms of reference? Okay. Mr. Khanyago, are you back now? Okay, he is still frozen. Mr. Khanyago there was going to just briefly take us through what it is exactly that the proclamation provides for. Mr. Khanyago?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, thank you very much, Vuyo. All I was saying is the proclamation asks of us to investigate maladministration in the affairs of NSFAS. And then what we are looking at specifically is how they are managing their finances. But secondly, we are looking into a situation where we've got to look into each and every transaction that happened in a period that is set out, which is the 1st of April 2016 up until on Friday. And we're looking into all the loans that they have given, all the funding in terms of bursaries that were given, including the funding that might not be any of the two that are there. We're also looking into the involvement of officials that are involved in terms of whether they have colluded with entities that were involved, or whether they might be residential entities, it might be universities or TVET colleges. We're looking at all of those things to make sure that we understand what kind of maladministration has happened during the period under scrutiny.
And where that is indeed the case, you are expected to recover those monies.
Well, definitely. We will then take these matters to the tribunal to make sure that we recover all of that money, because people need to understand that NSFAS was created for a reason, and it has to be, the money that is allocated there has to be used for that purpose. We hear from people that are calling us even now to say some of the monies were not used for that purpose. People are buying houses, people are buying cars with this money, and all of those things. And we need to understand what really happened. If there's collusion, which will be tantamount to be an issue of criminality, we will deal with it through the NPA. And then when money has to be recovered, we'll definitely do so.
Is it my misreading of the terms of reference when I say the probe will go further to sort of generally look at unauthorized, irregular, wasteful, and fruitless expenditure at NSFAS?
No, it's not a misreading. It is true. We will definitely look into that, because those are the things that we always look at when we look as to whether they followed the act. Because if they did not follow the act to authorize certain transactions, those transactions becomes unauthorized, and therefore some of them might end up being fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and we have got to recover it from someone. And therefore anyone who might have done anything wrong will have to be worried about this, because we'll have to recover it from them. And the other thing that is very interesting, Vuyo, is the fact that the proclamation doesn't only restrict us to the time of 1st April 2016 to the 26th of August. It says, if any of the transactions that are between that period leads us to prior to 2016 or before or after 2022, 26th of August, we have to follow it to that. Therefore, people mustn't say, no, my transaction happened before 2016, therefore I'm safe.
Mm-hmm. Very last one, any timelines? Have you put a time frame to this is investigation, or it'll depend on what comes out of it?
Yes, it will depend, Vuyo, because from today, our teams are now going to go into NSFAS and get all the documentation. And you must understand it must be thousands and thousands of documents that led to all the transactions that happened during that period. Therefore, once they've got the transactions and then the documentation, we will then determine the scope, and that will then give us the time frame that we want. But we will try and make sure that it is done as quickly as possible.
And that's why we're going to leave it with you. Thank you very much for your time. That's the spokesperson for the Special Investigation Unit, which not too long ago, a few days ago to be exact, got that proclamation signed by the President to, of course, probe the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Now, the NSFAS Chief Executive Officer, the CEO, and that's Mr. Andile Nongogo, joins me in the studio. Remember, you can tweet us with your questions, comments. The handles are on your screen. Good evening, sir. Thanks very much for your time. Lots of work ahead of you, in addition to what you're supposed to be doing on a normal, on a daily basis. The task of having to provide the SIU with all those documents that it's going to need is going to fall squarely on your shoulders. Perhaps first, your thoughts around this investigation and how it came about.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think perhaps the background to this is that during the administration period, you would recall that the administrator was appointed at NSFAS to go and, maybe simply put, to go and clean up the very maladministration we're talking about. Then, based on what the administrator found at the time, he had then written to the SIU for an investigation to take place. So in essence, This is an investigation that was initiated by NSFAS, so to speak. And so where we stand as the current management and the board of NSFAS, we fully support this investigation. We will fully cooperate with it. Of course, from our perspective, we and I noted in your introductory remarks that you indicated that some union was saying that this is long overdue. We actually of the same view in that, you know, wherever we go and whatever we do, we are followed by, if one can put it, the ghosts of the past. So the sooner we get this to bed, the better. So in essence, we are fully cooperating. Incidentally, this morning we had a conversation. We are talking to the SIU in terms of how to prepare. We are still just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, really. But the essence of it is that we are in full support. Of course, as you also indicated, there is other work that we are seized with at NSFAS. I mean, we have reaffirmed our approach in terms of being a student-centric organization, more a beneficiary-centric organization. So there are new initiatives that we are working on, and so this comes as we are starting those initiatives. So the key really would be to balance.
We'll get there. Yes. In a second. I just want us to sort of have the chronology, of things and other relevant facts on the table. When did you start?
I was appointed 1st of December 2020. Yes.
Okay. Now, in December last year, auditing firm Kuhumelela, right, produced what many people would say is a rather unflattering account, a report on the management of NSFAS finances. I mean, this came, before. December was only when they came out with this report. It found, among other things, that consultants were paid without signed contracts to regulate their work. It found that students were paid more than 503 million rands more than the amounts stipulated in loan agreements, and there was generally a limited oversight, risk management, of management activities. Now, if one takes just those three things, they are enough to, as you say, get your NEHAWs and even some of the student bodies to say something is not right. So when you went in, did you find any of that? And if you did you even attempt to then start fixing those?
No, thank you for that. Firstly, I think I must state on record, I'm not familiar with an audit firm, Kuhumelela, so I must say that.
It's called Kuhumelela.
I'm not familiar with them. However, the issues you are indicating are similar, let me rather say,
to what you found,
to the issues firstly raised by the Auditor General. Two, ours, and when I say ours, I mean myself as the new CEO and the board, was really to come in and turn the situation around. Of course, to start turning the situation around, you have to then go back to the previous audit reports and find what exactly were the issues. So, for example, yes, from where we started, there were no issues really around the issue of consultants being paid for no work done that we identified on our part. And also the issue of, let's say, erroneously or incorrectly funding students is still an issue that persists. For as long as people are trying to defraud the scheme, for as long as people are trying to get an advantage, we'll always find those. So the question is, what do we then put as a control in place to try and manage those? So what we did was the assessment of the organization in terms of what does the organization need for it to turn the corner, so to speak. So we looked at, is it properly structured in terms of the organizational structure? Do we have the right people? Is it even adequately structured? You'll recall that in 2018, the scheme stopped being a loan scheme. It was fully a bursary scheme. Now you want to assess whether or not you are structured in a manner to be able to deal with those particular issues. So those were one of the issues we looked at. Indeed, looking at the reports, it was clear that there are control deficiencies in the organization, and so we had to focus on making sure that we address those control deficiencies. Thirdly, in the prior period, we had noted that there was a qualification on the financial statements, and in fact the AG had also raised a number of material irregularities, which we then had to focus on. So the long and short of it is that indeed we had identified that there were lapses in some of the controls in the organization, and I should add that some of the work of this turnaround had been started by the administration team. So we simply built up on the work that was started then.
Detail, if you will, I mean, some of those things you're calling lapses. For example, how does how do students get approved without qualifying? I'm reminded of what the minister said a couple of months ago, that there were children of a highly successful, as he put it, government official who presumably weren't supposed to qualify, but did qualify, and they got bursaries. So how do those kinds of lapses even happen if the rules are as clear as they're supposed to be?
So I think maybe just to backtrack a little is to say that for one to qualify as an NSFAS beneficiary, the household income has to be 350 and below. Now, the mechanism you have, or we've since put in place, is one where you verify this against the SARS data. In the past, there was no means of verification, so you relied on pay slips, you relied on affidavits, which is where some of this undue funding would have come through. There are certain instances, as you would understand, that if a person doesn't also submit the tax returns like they should with SARS, because that's really our primary source of verification of the income, then we are likely to miss it in that sense, because what we do is we look at SARS as our primary source. If we can't find a person within SARS, then you go to the credit bureaus, and you would know that also by very nature, and really here I'm being speculative, that when people are applying for credit, they always want to put a higher position than normal, So that's why we don't necessarily want to rely on that as an avenue. So those instances would happen where there is this juncture between what is on the SARS data and what would be we are verifying. So typically, now that we actually have an MOU now with SARS, ideally we would want that this becomes a real-time verification, but there's a 72-hour turnaround when we give them the data and then we verify. Now, these instances actually that the minister you refer to, it's us now going back to the data from before to say, we know that there was a period where we were not verifying with SARS. Let's go back and check. That's now where we are able to find evidence of people who are fraudulently accessing the scheme. What we found is about 38,000 or so beneficiaries to the tune of 2.4 billion that were funded shouldn't have been funded. And of course, we are going through the processes of trying to
recoup.
To firstly unfund. When you're dealing with student population, is you have to also be sure that when you get to the process of unfunding, you've done everything possible, because you don't necessarily want to unfund people who you should not unfund, because then that has a tendency of destabilizing the sector. So we are going through that process, but we also think we do believe that with the capacity of the SIU, these are some of the areas we'll really be able to get to. Prior to administration, we did not have a forensic department, for example, nor an internal audit department. These have since been established. Now, the capacity there is not enough for us to go there in terms of reach. In fact, even if we do go, we do not necessarily have the powers that bodies like the SIU have. So I'm saying it does happen, and that's how it happened. In the circumstances where we are today, it would really be isolated instances where you find those because people would have falsified their SARS data. Or, in fact, what we've even done now is to extend this to also the CIPC, because the person might not necessarily submit the SARS data. You find that perhaps they've got entities that we don't know about. Then when you look at the entities' returns, you find that the returns actually indicate that this person should not be qualified. So this is in essence how some of these lapses come about.
And what about, I mean, there have been allegations, at some point, I think hundreds, more than 500 cases involving now officials of NSFAS defrauding students, their allowances and stuff. How far have you gone in dealing with that particular measure?
So again, I think to look into this, at least the way we understand it, particularly when we pay TVET college students, we use what is called a wallet system. Typically, this system requires cell phone number based. So with your cell phone number, so what happens is we require a student when they register with us to give us a cell phone number. Based on that cell phone number, after we've verified such a number, then we pay the student. So that particular system made it susceptible that, because also there was no segregation at the time of duties as to who loads a cell phone number, who ultimately presses the pay button. And of course, such instances were found in the previous reports where people were then loading their own cell phone numbers.
So were there consequences for such people?
There were investigations that were carried on. There were disciplinary processes that were done at the time. Of course, as I indicated to you, that there is actually an ongoing investigation as we speak subsequent to those investigations that happened during administration. Subsequent to that, there are processes that were reported to our fraud hotline that our team is busy investigating as we speak, which, of course, at this stage, I can't say because then it's investigations that are going on. But yes, the indicators are that there are numbers that are linked to particular staff members that were associated with payments.
But no one has been prosecuted yet, fired, disciplinary action taken against them.
So you would recall, well, you would understand, Vuyo, that when one goes through an investigation, you still go through the inquiries. There's a process. So that process is going on. These matters were matters that were reported last year that our team is busy investigating. So at this stage, indeed, I'm now talking about these new instances that we've identified. So we're still going through that process of investigation. We have not yet concluded. However, those that were found during administration, there were disciplinary processes that were undertaken by the organization, and there were people that ultimately were dismissed as part of that.
Can you vouch for your IT and other systems, though? And the reason I'm asking is because one assumes that it should be easy, fairly easy, for one to see, who punched in the number, the cell phone number of the student, and who would have released, the funds to that number. But if your IT systems can give you that, and then obviously there's a problem with it. And if one looks at that on the back of, you recall at the beginning of the year, lots of students saying they were trying to get in touch, trying to sort out their problems, but they would be told that the IT system is down and so on. So maybe you're paying for the sins of an IT system that is not up to scratch. Can you vouch for it?
No, I think you are precisely touching the point. On many occasions, even when we've appeared before the oversight committees, we've actually indicated, as part of that assessment you asked about at the beginning, is that in that assessment we had actually found that the IT systems were not fit for purpose in terms of what it is that we are trying to do. And now I think for everybody else, there's always this issue or this question of, but if you know it's the IT system, so why don't you then acquire new systems, build new systems? Our organization is quite challenged in a sense that, when we look at how our organization is funded, we look at the quantum that is for student funding. You said it's tens of billions. Actually, the true amount that we are funding students to the tune of is 43 billion in this current year. Now, you equate that to, of course, in absolute terms, the number looks big. You equate that to the administration budget that we have, which is about 312 million. In absolute terms, it all looks like it's a big amount. But if you take it in percentage terms, that is 0.8% of what we have to administer. Now, with that administration budget, you still have to have salaries for the employees. The amount that goes to our salary bill in percentage terms is about 60% that goes to salaries. Then you have your overheads that you say, let's say about 25% goes to overheads. So what you really have is this small margin to be able to make improvements on any other thing, which includes the systems. So which is why last year we had been engaging with the Department of Higher Education and Training, including National Treasury. We were then given an amount of 65 million towards our systems. And that's exactly what we are doing now. We are currently building those systems and improvements. I can say with certainty that when we start the new application cycle in September, there'll be lots of improvements there. Some of the issues that the students are facing would have eradicated as part of this improvement. However, including the 65 that we've been given, we are still in discussions again with National Treasury and Department where we are saying we actually need more, because you'd imagine if one looks at NSFAS as a bank, that we need a whole lot of robust systems, robust processes. So that is really has been some of the limitations.
So you're saying it's not you and your team, it's not how you are managing this organization, but what you have to make do with. And I'm asking this because last month, the Financial Aid Practitioners of South Africa called for a resignation, saying under your stewardship, NSFAS has, and I quote, neglected its core responsibilities, close quote.
So, firstly, I think I should be clear in saying the following, that by us talking about systems, we are not necessarily saying that there are probably no issues with the staff itself, including myself for that matter, if that is the assessment. However, from where I'm standing, I'm appointed by the Minister and the Board of NSFAS. As the management of NSFAS, those structures have confidence in the work that we do. In fact, so that one doesn't speak for themselves. Within 7 months of us joining NSFAS and with the new board, the audit outcomes of NSFAS improved. We are busy putting processes that seek to improve the organization. Now, the association you are referring to, firstly, it's an association that meets with our team regularly. I'm talking now operations team. However, in my view, where I engage stakeholders, there's a body called University South Africa, which is USAF. It's for university where all the vice chancellors are represented. I do engage that body. I do engage the student leadership. In fact, our team does engage even the substructures of USAF. We must also indicate that FAPSA is not a structure of USAF. However, we engage them anyway. Now, in an organization, there are certain people who deal with different things. The contention here with FAPSA is that I'm not going to engage with them. I don't go and engage with them, right? Not that because I don't want to, but because there are people dedicated to deal with certain issues. And again, for one to be specific about things have gone off, one, you would have to first understand what exactly is it that they are not satisfied with. Secondly, our client is the student. Now, I would understand a concern coming from our client, the student, who we engage regularly, because we believe that the improvements that we are putting into the organization, into the system, into the sector, are for our beneficiaries.
Okay. Let me take a couple of tweets. I understand we have quite a few that we have from people who are watching the program. Mapeto Tsieti says, solve the issue of outstanding fees at Tswana University of Technology. We can't use NSFAS from first year until final year and still owe the institution. No ways. What is it?
So I think we must, that particular issue, there is a process that is called the closeout process, right? And I hope you'll allow me some time to just explain.
I don't have it. That's why I wanted us to quickly.
It requires explanation. But basically what that is a process that reconciles amounts that were owed to well, let's put it this way. When we make a funding decision, we say a student is eligible for funding, and then we only fund a student when we get registration data for that particular student. Now, then we pay for that student based on what is submitted by an institution. Now, over the years, from the period 2017 to 2020, the reconciliations between us and the institutions were not happening because, one, you want to make sure that the student you've paid for is actually ultimately funded.
Where's the delay? Whose fault was it?
So it's really administration issues. I'm saying administrative issues between institutions and us where we could not reach a conclusion. Now, this is where many students are stuck, where they're saying, you have not paid my fee because...
Are they caught in the crossfire? Is it something that you and the university should be able to solve? Because they're sitting there saying...
Of course, from a student perspective, they are caught in the crossfire. However, I should maybe indicate that they're in a position where we've agreed with institutions on the reconciliation, where we've concluded these reconciliations, barring a few matters. And what we've instructed our team is that where the students are cleared, now it's clear that this is truly a funded student. We should pay, or at least the institutions, up until we pay for that particular student, they should clear them and allow them to register and continue.
Okay. Please ask him about the notorious Kagisho. How has he been able to survive all the shenanigans he has put NSFAS through? Or as black people who are failing, and hopefully one day things will call all right.
I think if you allow me to say this, I really don't think it would be fair for me to talk about colleagues, because also the issue is very not much specific about. As far as I know, Mr. Mamabulo, there are no issues against Mr. Mamabulo that have been found by the organization. So it would be really unfair for me to single him out in all the staff members that we have.
The corruption at NSFAS is organized. It's university management together with SRC and NSFAS officials. They all get their cut.
I must comment on that.
Of course.
Well, maybe one can say this, that we, on the work we have done, particularly through the cases we get in our forensic unit, and also some of the work, I should indicate, based on the inquiries and the discussions we've been having with the SIU, based on investigations that they are holding elsewhere in other institutions, there is certainly indication that there may be some wrongdoing happening on the part of the institutions. There are indications that there may be some wrongdoing happening on our part from the level of our staff. So one cannot dispute that, and we are hoping exactly that this process that the SIU is embarking on will ultimately clean up those kind of issues and identify them.
One quick one. I know the team's going to kill me because we've seriously run out of time, but I have to ask you about student accommodation, which remains a big issue. And from my understanding, one of the solutions you're proposing is that your team or teams should also get involved, because universities aren't playing their part in terms of checking these accommodation places, making sure that they're up to scratch, conducive for learning and all of that. But the issue some people are raising is that the very same officials who haven't really dealt, as far as they are concerned, dealt with issues the way they should have, are now part of the solution. And you're talking about billions of rands that are involved here. So if your officials can get involved in small allowances of students, how much more, given the corruption that people are saying is endemic in the student accommodation part of your business?
So I think the reason why we precisely are getting into student accommodation is exactly the issues you are raising. One, NSFAS spends an amount of at least 12 billion rand a year on student accommodation. For any proper organization to spend that much of amount and not be involved in the process actually is a serious travesty. And bearing in mind that our beneficiaries are the people who actually get second-grade treatment. They would be the last ones to be allocated. They would be the last ones to be given. They would be the ones to be placed in accommodation that is not conducive to study. On the other hand, we get charged exorbitant amounts. So we're getting involved to making sure that we get value out of this. And again, I think we also had to go the systems route with this, to make sure we've got a system that will be able to manage this. Now, again, I think it's also unfair to paint all of us who are dedicated to serving our people, to serving the country, who are dedicated to doing the right thing, to be painted in a single brush with some
few. Saying that.
Some few
here's a
elements.
reality we've had to live with, that these probes have been there, for quite a while. And as you said earlier, still no one has been found, guilty or anything. I mean, there is no evidence that you are actually dealing with, shall we call them, the rotten potatoes, within and among yourselves. And there you are now adding into a system that, as I was saying earlier, is known to be corrupt, where a lot more money is involved. We don't know who, swindled the students out of their little allowances. So it becomes difficult to then say, can we trust you with billions then?
I think I would like to get an opportunity, and we are running out of time, to really unpack for you what it is that we are proposing and our processes on student accommodation.
I'll make time for that.
Because then you will see the controls that we are building in the systems and in the process to avoid those very such instances. Because again, I think what we are cognizant of is that we are not getting involved for the sake of. We are getting involved to making sure that there are proper controls and systems in the process. And to say what I'm saying, I'm not necessarily saying that there aren't such controls at an institution level, but I'm basically saying that for an organization that spends 12 billion, one, we should be able to negotiate value for our students. Two, we should make sure that the money is spent as intended.
And no one will disagree with you on those two. But thank you very much, Mr. Nongogo, for availing yourself. And that's our show for this evening. To join us again tomorrow night, same time.